Welcome this morning. I want to introduce you to Lisa Masters and Kaleigh Wagner in engaging the next generation of philanthropists. Presented, as I said, by Lisa, who is a CWR. And see, I went off script, which is just what I never should have done. So Lisa has more than 20 years of fundraising experience across all sectors in annual fund, corporate giving, grant writing, gala events, board development, training, and more. The vast majority of her fundraising time has been in major gifts, comprehensive campaigns, and planned giving, including blended gift proposals. Kaleigh Wagner has partnered with organizations throughout the central United States, spanning across the religious, health education, and social services sectors. Her areas of expertise include feasibility studies, campaign planning, major gift strategies, scaling development operations, and building organizational capacity. Let's soak in some wisdom from these experienced professionals today. Welcome, Lisa and Kaleigh.
Thank you. So if I could ask, would anyone be willing to move up here to the front? Lisa doesn't bite. No promises.
We were just avoiding the window, the breeze.
Yeah.
Is it still open? Because we were all cold from being
Yes, we're
downstairs.
freezing upstairs.
Downstairs, we were so cold.
I agree. It's too cold. We're just freezing.
You know, it feels like it's kind of warm.
Yeah, it feels warm coming out of here.
It's almost warmer.
I think
It's
we
warm.
were all just frozen from being downstairs. So
Yeah,
it was
oh,
like,
yeah.
if there's a breeze coming, we didn't
Well,
want
it's
it.
actually a warm breeze.
Okay, then I'll take it.
Go for
So,
it.
no, thank you for that. We like to be able to. Yes. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all today. I was just chatting with Maureen, and we're about to do our introductions, but I will share a fun fact about myself that I just learned needs to be my new fun fact. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through university, and while I was at John Carroll in Cleveland, I was partnered with a Sister of Mercy, kind of as a mentor throughout a summer internship, and she bought me my very first beer.
Oh.
Do with that what you will, but I feel closer to you already. But Lisa and I are really excited to talk to you about engaging the next generation of philanthropists. I think this is a really exciting topic, specifically for the Catholic Church, as we're looking at ensuring that the next generation can continue to spread the good news and fund the mission that we really care about and ensure that it furthers. So what Lisa and I are going to be talking about will feel pretty familiar in the sense of a lot of this is simply fundraising best practices, but with some specific nuance, specifically around communication with the younger generation. So with that intro, I'm Kaleigh Wagner. I'm an Assistant Vice President with CCS Fundraising. I already shared my beer fun fact with you all. But my first client with CCS was the Diocese of Rapid City. So I was there for 14 months in total, running a $12 million campaign for the diocese. And then a few years back, I worked with Providence Cristo Rey in Indianapolis, running a 16-point-something campaign for them. So I've had wonderful Catholic client partners. I'm a big fan of the Jesuits. I went to a Jesuit high school and college, and I'm just really excited to be with you here today. Lisa?
And my experience comes from a wide variety, but I spent 9 years at St. Louis University. And I worked in the School for Professional Studies, which is typically referred to as adult education, non-traditional, mostly online. And then I spent the bulk of my experience, particularly around a $600 million campaign that SLU just completed about a year ago in the engineering school, engineering and aviation. And we worked around scholarships specifically for that campaign, and then the building of a STEM-specific combo engineering and hard science building. And so I am also a fan of the Jesuits. And so we are happy to be here today. So I'm going to turn it back over to you for a minute.
A bit about the firm. CCS has been around for 75 years. We were actually created by two brothers, not in the religious sense, but two blood brothers who were working within their Catholic church and wanted to provide more empowerment and support for their community, and that's kind of how we were born. So we have been lending our expertise across sectors. We have currently more than 600 plus organizations, and our approach is really kind of boots on the ground in the sense that our directors are there with their clients, so we can make an impact immediately, while also ensuring that our work, our strategies, our tools are really forward-looking and remain helpful to you well into the future after your campaign, after an increased annual fund initiative, etc. This is a small smattering of experience within the archdiocesan, diocesan, and individual Catholic Church realm. This, as I kind of mentioned, initially started as our bread and butter for the firm, and it's still a really large part of what we get to do, and it's certainly a privilege to continue to partner with such, important work and really wonderful clients.
And I would point out, as I start sharing a bit, that one of my recent clients was the Catholic Foundation of Northeast Kansas, and I have a few stories that I'm going to share from that interaction. So as we move along, really we're going to talk about the great wealth transfer, and I know that everyone has heard about that. I just hope to provide a few extra pieces of information. And then engaging by generation, and then Kaleigh is going to take us into a deep dive. And as Kaleigh and I were kind of tapped to do this, what I thought was interesting is that you're looking at Gen X, and then you're looking at
A cusper.
I'm a cusper too.
I'm a cusper.
Yeah.
Gen Z Millennial.
There you go. So we just want to have fun here today. It is a lot of information. I think you're going to be boggled, or it's really going to boggle your mind, some of the information that we've got and statistics. But please feel free to ask questions throughout, and then we have a few questions that we have for you as well. So when you think about this great generational wealth transfer, none of this is really new information, I don't think, but the key points are when you think about what we call the matures, which is really what is also known as the silent generation, and then the baby boomers. Lately they've been putting those two together into a tag called matures. And then you get to Gen X, and then you get to millennial, and then you get to Gen Z, and then what are we calling the alpha? Is that the?
I thought it was Y. You're right most of the time. So
I think it's like alpha or something. So what's important about this is that we have a huge amount of money that's going to be that's going to be moving down by generation. And ultimately what it means is that particularly during the time of 2031 and 2045, 10% of the total wealth in the United States is going to be changing hands every 5 years. And so that is a lot of money, and that is a lot of potential. And so as we move through this, that's what I want you to hear, is that this is a place where you can talk with donors and with your constituents about how they can continue their impact beyond themselves and through their family. And so COVID had a lot of impacts that we all know, we were there. But the thing that really sort of brought all of this wealth transfer to mind a little more is the fact that people at a younger age began to think about their wills and their trust and what was going to happen to them. That transfer timeline accelerated, and then and for that third box, the amount transferred to millennials has been reduced. I really think that's Gen X's fault because we were not as good with our money as the baby boomers were. And so I just found that a little bit interesting. And then there is a shift in the financial priorities of the younger generations, and we will talk about that and how you can utilize what you do in a way that will engage those generations in a way that they will hear.
one fun fact to add, as we're looking at the wealth transfer and how that will impact planned giving vehicles in the future, Lisa had just mentioned folks are starting to think about that sooner. when we on the CCS side of things are doing analytical work or trying to distinguish the prime plan giving candidate of folks we really want to be narrowing in on, that's an age range of 45 to 60. And previously, that work often started at a later age, presumably. But just flagging that for you all as you really zone in on that is the time that people are looking at their wills and creating these plans is younger and younger.
And things have become a little more complex in that in younger generations doing that, someone who is 40 is now utilizing a donor advised fund to do their gifting. And nonprofits sometimes are not as savvy in how to steward that person, or to even know, the check comes in from the Greater Cleveland Community Foundation, and finding out who that really was that you need to steward. And then some people, as they age, are utilizing that DAF for all of their estate works, so that all of their IRA would push into that, and all of the other pieces would go into that at their passing, and then they have their family trustees who are initiating how that will be dispersed. And so that donor advised fund for the younger generation is extremely important. And then as they age, and this is entirely off topic, and then as they age, someone who is now 72 is the required age of a minimum distribution from an IRA. So most people who are at that age or slightly below have been very good with their money, and many times that required minimum distribution will be taxed. If they give it to a nonprofit, they save themselves tax money. And so they can begin at 70 and a half. It's required at 72 now. And so that's another group, kind of a segment group of donors that you can really reach out to and steward in a specific way.
And if you're not as savvy as Lisa, like I am not as savvy as Lisa when it comes to plan giving, on a continual learning journey there, CCS online, our blog posts have a lot of helpful resources as it pertains to getting further up to speed in plan giving and how to either start thinking about thinking that for your development team or really doing it. So flagging that as a helpful resource.
So I think some of the key things when we think about the great wealth transfer is the difference in how generations view impact. And we'll talk about that throughout our presentation. But for the next generation, it really is about more social issues, the greater good, what they can do. And I would almost put it in a hands-on, their boots on the ground to work with a nonprofit, and that is how you engage. The transmitting generosity from parent or guardian to the child, I think that can't be understated. So for those of you who have worked with plan giving in the past, have you ever heard the term legacy giving? So that's typically how we use it. So when I was with Catholic Foundation of Northeast Kansas, I talked to a number of patriarchs and matriarchs of families, and they would be in their 70s. And a number of those people, literally a great number of the people that I interviewed, commented that as they got toward the holidays, they would gather their family together. So they would gather then their children who were in their 50s, so the Gen Xers, and then they would gather their grandchildren and sometimes their great-grandchildren, and they would talk about what they were going to give to. They would talk about their philanthropy. And the more that I heard this story over and over again, the more I thought, this is legacy giving. Passing on the legacy of philanthropy. And so encouraging and communicating to your constituents about how to involve the younger generations. So that, and I've asked people this in the past, do your children know what your largest gift goes to every year? Do they know beyond the tie to the church what else you give to? That's where legacy giving comes in. So how things will change. One of the things that I thought was all of these actually connect. So the shift in the job market will cause people to go to a more entrepreneurial setting. The influx of wealth from their inheritances is going to probably cause them to buy the purse that they wouldn't have bought 5 years ago, or the car that they wouldn't have purchased 5 years ago, more luxury goods. That combined with the shift in the job is going to basically give them 5 times as much wealth as they do today. and that is discretionary income that we can view as giving potential. And so eventually that will have an effect on the stock market as well. So let's take a few minutes and do a little poll. So I'm going to start at the bottom. Thinking about your constituents, how many of you would say that you have constituents that fall into Generation Z? Raise your hand. So this would be 1996 and after. How about millennials, born between 1981 and 1995? So they are now 42 to 28. Then how about Generation X, 1965 to 1980? Okay. And then baby boomers? And then do any of you have anyone who would fully go into the silent generation of the majority? Okay. So I kind of see that the majority of the hands were there. So how many of you would say that the majority of your donors are matures? How many of you would say the majority are baby boomers and not matures? Okay. And then anyone in my generation representing well for you? Okay. So what do you do? What do you do differently by generation? Anything? Yeah.
I mean, ours, everything's in print. You know, like e-news, like everything has to be hard copy. You have to mail it to their houses. Because it's such an older generation of donors, most of them are not providing emails to us, so we're not really able to reach out to them electronically. So it's challenging because you have to pay more for print than obviously in e-news. So we're spending more money by getting all those printed to such people.
You do. I find it interesting that I have been a fundraiser for many, many years. And when I went to work for the engineering school at SLU, I would sit in development meetings and people would say, oh, our donors are of an age that there's no way that I can email or text them. And I worked for the college that basically graduated Gene Kranz, who was the person who was on Apollo 11, who was the flight director for Apollo 11. So these are people who are highly technical. And while they were that age, they were texting me and they were emailing me and they were, I mean, all of the things that go with the younger generation. And so it can be so individual as well, you know. But my rule of thumb as a fundraiser was that I would communicate in whatever way they gave me permission to. And so I would not generally text someone until they gave me their number and said, call or text me. Because to me, that's like the most personal form of communication. And then after that might be the phone call, and then after that might be the email. So I would just do as they kind of directed and gave me permission. I love this overview of giving. So I did want to point out a couple of things here. All of this definitely makes sense. That giving by percentage of the generation totally makes sense. But I think to what you've talked about here, your baby boomers are actually providing more for your organization. And what is surprising to me is that Gen Z is as high as it is. I was a little surprised by that. But the other thing to note is that they volunteer. And volunteering is how you get them in the door and engaged. And then after that, then you begin to talk about monetary contributions.
I noticed that with Gen Z, it was more our online giving. We get a little bit older age groups, but usually it's the baby boomers and the Gen Zs that were really online giving.
So this is a little more focused in on exactly what we're talking about. And when you refer to mobile giving, millennials and G are far more willing to give via their mobile device. Us older folks, not so much. As a matter of fact, I have to be fully transparent. I purchased tickets for a concert this Saturday, and through Ticketmaster, they said you can put it into your Apple Pay. But they required facial identity, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So that's it. So it's just different. They're just different in how they do things. The social media and influencers. A larger percentage of younger donors use social media, and they will listen to what a celebrity or influencer has to say. And what's interesting is that actually, when you think about direct mail, all of the generations are okay with it. I was so shocked by this that I contacted the folks in our strategy and ops department who did this, and I was like, I want to make sure I'm reading that right.
It's 70% of Gen Z are okay with receiving direct mail at least once a month.
Yeah. So I was completely shocked by that. And then when it comes to online engagement, Gen Z is those that view and post videos, and so in other words, TikTok. While everyone else, including millennials, which was also a little surprising, are okay with an e-newsletter. And so I think the point to take away from all of this really is to communicate by generation how they are going to take in the information. Ultimately, that's your objective. And then again, with the younger generation, they volunteer, so that's how to get them in. And there are a number of usually arts organizations that do like a young professionals group, consider something like that to pull people in. So the breakdown of giving, again, this is probably not a surprise. A lot of this is based on where they are in life. And so your Gen X, they are in their first apartment, they are trying to buy groceries. Millennials have small children. Those of us in Generation X either have college kids, we're paying for college tuition, or they're just finished with college. And then baby boomers, they have the most discretionary income. And so it just it's a logical following. So we talked a little bit about this, but are there specific things or ideas that you're doing to communicate and to engage to the various generations? Yes, sir.
We actually don't do anything different from generation to generation. We, just everyone gets the same thing. We certainly find that, the younger, and we don't have a lot of young donors, but the younger donors are more attracted to social media things, to our podcast, those sorts of things, whereas our older ones respond to our newsletter and our mailings. But we don't segment our donors out and say, okay, this group gets these things, that group gets those things. We just spray it across the entire donor base. We actually don't collect the information on their ages, so we couldn't segment by age.
Anyway.
Yeah,
Sure.
I don't know, does everybody collect information on the donors' ages or no?
So I think a couple of things. I worked for St. Louis University. We had everyone's ages because they had been a student. And so we had ages. What we didn't have is usually things like anniversaries. But what we did in that case is where we knew it, where the fundraiser knew it or had captured that information, we put it into the database. And so for an institution that is not a school, I think that's where you get that information. And by, as you meet with people, development is always ever going to be a relational experience and not transactional. So as you meet with people and you note, just by looking at them or in conversation, you know that they are nearing an age where they're going to be needing to do a required minimum distribution. Or you know that they typically interact with you via email, then email's good. If you realize that it's an older donor and they're only writing you for years at SLU, I had a gentleman who would send me 3 $2 bills every year, the end of the year, in mail, by mail, and it was always with a reply envelope that was like 10 years old. It was very curious, very nice guy, but I never would have even attempted to email him because it wouldn't go anywhere. But just recognizing things like that and then recording it in a way that makes sense. Not in a way that would be offensive to anyone, but in a way that makes sense, where highlight in whatever area of your database, email is the best form of communication, or texting is okay. And in any of those situations, any of your donors have the opportunity to opt out, and you would record that in your database anyway.
So I'm curious, could I just ask the room, I just show of hands, how many people record either the generation they belong to or the age of their donors? Just how many?
We have.
But by general practice, do you record that, or is it just, if it happens to come to you, you put it in the database? You,
So we send out birthday cards to all donors, but moving, like, the newer donors aren't getting that information. You know, so if they provide it, yes, but we ask.
thank you.
Yeah, I have like 60,000 donors, names collected, and they're all have been past donors. And about 5,000 are active. But anytime like any donor comes in, a big donor, I will go to like True People Search, or there's a couple other, that's free. There's a couple other things that give you their month and year.
Okay.
What was that?
True People Search, it's a free one.
What does that do?
It gives you their, it always says the month and year of their birth. And they have like some relatives you can kind of see. And I use it a lot too with when somebody makes a bequest. And I want to try to find out if the person that's their trustee is a relative or not. You can kind of see that. And there was another website I used all the time, but then I can't remember the name of it. I was paying for it, and then I found this True People Search, and it seems pretty good.
Parish census is also an opportunity to ask for birthdays, just noting that's a mandatory field that they have to add in.
Well, I didn't hear what you said. What is it?
When conducting parish censuses, a parish census.
Oh, parish census. Okay,
Yes, I made
census.
it bizarrely plural, so hard to understand, but a census.
Or parish registrations often have that same information.
Thank you.
So I think the thing to keep in mind as we move through and communicate with different generations is the fact that there are timeless principles of donor engagement that do not change. And it really does start with consistent information and then conveying the impact of the donor's gift. I fully believe and am completely convinced that every donor, whether they are 20 or 80, want to know what their gift did. What did it do? As I was on that Catholic Foundation project, one of the things that particularly the older donors would say is, I want to know that the work of my church will go on beyond me. And so that's what they were giving to, the fact that their work would, their desire of their church that was so important to them and the work that they did would go on. Personalized outreach of just what we've been conversing about, knowing your donor, and then utilizing technology also, you know, however they're going to receive the information, and then tell your story. I really can't overemphasize that. Always, always, always tell your story a lot, over and over, in whatever way that people will hear it. For a millennial, it might be a short video on TikTok, a story of someone who has been one of your clients, if it's that kind of organization, or you know, someone who has received the impact. And then always make a clear call to action. Donate, volunteer, event attendee, and that type of thing. But make sure that they know what you're asking for. Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So our, what we're fundraising for is basically, I work at the Provincial House, and it's really for the retired sisters who live at the Provincial House. Any sort of like living expenses that go with, you know, along with that. So when I'm conveying a message, I'm usually like, the sisters have done so much throughout their lives, now it's your turn to kind of help them while they're retired. But I never have like specific concrete examples of what the money went towards. Like, what am I gonna say? If it paid the National Grid bill at the Provincial House? Like, I don't, you know, I never have like specific examples to show donors exactly what their money is going towards.
Yeah, with millennials and Gen Zs particularly, transparency is really stressed and important. And so if we're going to do a deep dive next into those two generations. So if it's a younger donor, being transparent and saying this is living costs, and you could give that as an example, it's not as glamorous maybe as some other
Not
things.
at all.
But
Yeah.
then you have an opportunity to couple that with not just stating that fact, but to Lisa's point, telling this story, you know, of, you know, what did this sister do? What was a highlight of her career and her impact? How did she make a difference in the community that you were in?
And I think I've always been a fan of breaking it out in a very tangible way. So if $100 $500 pays for 5 meals or a week of particular sister's meals, or if $25,000 pays for a month of one sister's residential care. And breaking it out like that, I think, and this is for me as well personally, if you were to ask me for $500, I would want to know kind of what that goes to. But if you were to say $500 would send 2 young women to a conference that would benefit them professionally, I'd be like, I'm in. So I think making it tangible, and does that also work for the younger generations?
Yeah, certainly. And then there's always the opportunity to tie that specific, I think of Feeding America, as Lisa was saying, they do that really well. $1 provides 10 meals. So you can give that quantitative stat, which the older generations are certainly a bit more partial to than the younger. But then you can talk about what that really means for this person that we're talking about. Which I think is a good transition to doing this deep dive with Gen Z and Millennials. The permeating feeling and driving of their philanthropy is wanting to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And so knowing that as a driving force, I think really helps us tell clear stories, whether that's quantitative or qualitative information. This next section is going to be familiar to it, or similar to what Lisa said, but again, just more nuanced to these specific generations. I think this slide is important as we're talking about a culture of philanthropy. So I think it's important to note the switch from the term just fundraising, and this is a development shop, to philanthropy, which is engaging in relationship with your donors, whether they're donating their time, their talent, their treasure, their testimonies, their ties. It is ensuring that every single person within the organization is involved and celebrated. So let's look at our Gen Z and our Millennials. Lisa had mentioned this with Gen Z, but it is pretty staggering to think that the average gift annually for Gen Z is above $700. When we think about that as a monthly gift, and talking about kind of that donor period of getting folks in at the annual level first and upgrading as your relationship builds, that's a substantial gift. Even if it is $20 a month, we talk a lot about sacrificial giving. That is a lot for someone just starting their career in their life. And so again, that culture of philanthropy, of celebrating that significance. And then when we look at Millennials, over the past year, according to Giving USA data, that their giving has gone up by 40% annually, from $932 to just a little above $13,000. So just further emphasizing, why we really need to be honing into this growing generation and their philanthropic potential. Gen Z and Millennials are really focused on seeking a more equitable and just future. So when I was preparing for this presentation, it had me thinking about Catholic social teaching and how so much of Gen Z and Millennials' purpose and drive can be rooted back to those principles. I'm specifically thinking about, let's see how my Catholic education did me, caring for God's creation, and solidarity, certainly is standing with the community and together. So Gen Z and Millennials are very driven by racial justice movements. That was what they reported in the past year as their most compelling component to give to. And again, some parishes and organizations tackle that issue head on, others do not. And even when they don't, there is that opportunity to weave in that Catholic social teaching principle of justice and solidarity and standing with. So there's still opportunity within this group, even if we're not talking about that directly. And that goes to connection and inclusion as well, which is also a driving force of these two generations. We also have opportunity to expand the definition of charitable giving. So Gen Z and Millennials, as seen through COVID-19, are very responsive. They are much more likely, 3 times more likely, to immediately respond to a call of action, specifically within disaster relief or just current happenings. So prioritizing the immediate need, talking about these global problems that we're working to fix and how this pastoral care can solve for that issue. Really transparent, back to the conversation we were having about, the electric bill. Gen Zs and Millennials specifically value that. These 2 generations are pretty hyper-focused on where their dollar is going, which is a good thing. But that communication and transparency is key there. And then these 2 generations as well are kind of leading the way right now as we look at crowdfunding. And so there's opportunity to think through how that can be woven within your own fundraising. We could look at Sunday collection and tithing as a form of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. And so just kind of something interesting to think about there. When we talk about the personalized journey of a Gen Z and Millennial giving, it's really the same as we think through our other generations of giving. However, they want to dive deeper. They want more information. They want to understand your motivating factors. Where is that dollar going? Why does it matter? And so over-communicating, or what we would think might be over-communicating if we were talking to the baby boomer generation, is really valued and accepted by these generations. So let's talk about engagement, which we've kind of started to do as a group talking about this. Communication methods really need to catch attention of the Gen Z and Millennials, and this helps increase retention. So one action step that this team can take, as we were talking about print materials, is certainly still utilizing those. But can you make any of your documents, your resources, your touch points mobile friendly? So I have my organizations that I give to monthly. And I'm a fundraiser, I only read what comes through my phone and email, and I do prefer social media. So I'll glance at the newsletter that is sent to me, but then I read the newsletter in an email version. And so that even might look like double communicating with your donors, and that's where you would want to segment off your donors, or at least have an idea, because some folks would not appreciate getting the same thing in the mail and online. And this is also an opportunity to potentially cut down on expenses if you do have this data available of, instead of a print of 1,000, we're going to print 500, and these folks and below are going to receive it via email. Another opportunity in terms of communication methods is really tapping into your young professionals. We're going to talk about this more on the next slide, so we don't need to go into it too much here, but thinking about your young professionals within your organizations as another mode of folks who can advocate for you and bring people into the mission and why this is important, hearing that from peer to peer. Because as we know, Gen Z and Millennials are really about being a part of something bigger than themselves. And so if they have a friend or a familiar face, or someone even that is more within their generation, being invited in to join something bigger than them goes a really long way.
Could I add something on my communication methods? I think historically, as people have let go of print mail, it has been for cost-saving purposes. As you think about electronic communications, that is an inexpensive way to segment, because it doesn't cost you anything to make one email newsletter that has this as the story and another email newsletter that has something else as the story or the call to action. So it really does, in my mind, this opens up really a ton of other opportunity by utilizing that electronic.
Mm-hmm. And to Lisa's point, I think sometimes when we hear about, different communication channels and different messaging to different demographics, it can be pretty overwhelming, particularly if you have a lean and mean development shop. But this is something that you can scaffold and truly take this one step at a time of even starting to send things mobilely, electronically. And then from there, as you build your foundation, getting more nuanced in the messaging that you send out within different methods. So it doesn't have to happen instantly. I know this team knows that, but just wanting to call that out because it is a lot of work. As we talk about messaging, clear calls to action is important to these two generations. So as Lisa mentioned, really telling the story, like not just telling the story for the sake of, I'm gonna tell you the story and it's gonna really, pull out your heartstrings and then you're gonna give. Well, that's a part of fundraising strategy. It's also to build that connection within the storytelling. So when I think of a really effective homily, I can feel that connection with my priest. I can feel that connection of, he's not just telling me this story, and I'm gonna walk out of here and all of a sudden, I'm gonna be A+ Catholic today. That'd be great. But it is also making me feel like I am a part of this community, that I am valued within this church. And that's the same thing with our messaging for Gen Zs and Millennials, and really your entire donor base. Involvement opportunities. So this is where we really want to focus in on getting young professionals involved. Lisa also mentioned junior boards, associate boards. A lot of times, I'm working with a client now and it's friends of my client name. This is a great way to get people in the door invested in manageable bite-sized pieces. And since these two generations like to be a part of something bigger than themselves, they like to take immediate action, they like to volunteer, giving them ways to be hands-on and for them to see the impact they're creating is really helpful in making them advocates and speaking about your organization. And then bringing other people in and saying, I had this experience. What I did mattered and made an impact, and now I'm going to invite you to join me in doing this. Conveying an impact. Last, but 100% not least, as we're talking about ideas for engagement, that's been the undercurrent of this entire conversation. Are you sharing that volunteers also make an impact? So one of my favorite stories is I think about explaining the culture of philanthropy is Lisa walks into NASA. She has this really important board meeting that she's presenting at, and she can't find the room where she's supposed to be presenting. So she grabs the first person she sees in the hallway. She's making small talk before asking for some help, and she goes, oh, what do you do here? And this person goes, well, I help people get to the moon. And it's the janitor who's taking care of this organization. And that is an example of culture of philanthropy and making sure that everyone within your organization and community feels a part of this overarching mission, that they have a role in getting people to the moon, even if it is ensuring that facilities are clean so people are safe and comfortable when doing their work. And that goes a long way when we're celebrating volunteers and smaller acts, but still important acts within your organization. Also use different mediums to show appreciation. We know that Gen Z and Millennials like to be communicated with on all the forms of social media. When we're thinking about Instagram, we like to see posts, but we also like to see stories. Digestible, quicker information is really great with Gen Z and Millennials. We kind of talked about this here, but I'm just going to flag it again because it really is interesting.
It is.
Is that when we look at Gen Z, 70% would appreciate receiving direct mail. That's a really high number, especially when we're looking at baby boomers who really don't want to be communicated with. And while that 70% is for direct mail, we of course do see that email and text is the preferred method of communication. So that's why we're working towards making at least some of your communication mobile friendly, so you can push that out. And if you don't have phone numbers, just as we were talking about birth dates, in parish registration, in the census, in other ways that you are asking your community for information, getting those phone numbers if you don't have them, it's going to be really critical to future success. So let's talk next steps. Get creative. I can feel it in this room. This is a creative team. So as we think about our stewardship, using these different vehicles that might not be as comfortable or familiar currently, and think about how you can articulate how their contributions create significant impact. Bring them along for the ride. We like transparency. We want to give our input to buy into the mission in your organization. We want volunteer opportunities. How can I get my hands dirty and thus care more about what we're talking about? And then really utilizing young professionals in terms of donor communications. So we talk a lot about time, talent, and treasure. I like to think that there are 5 T's as opposed to 3. The 4th being testimony and the 5th being ties. So something we talk about, but I think it's important that we say the 5 T's. Gen Z and Millennials are very passionate about the last 2, of testimonies and ties. Bringing new people in and sharing about their experience because they feel strongly about your impact.
So can I ask a question? When it comes to stewardship, how do you steward your donors? Do you give them gifts? Do you provide recognition?
I have a question for you both, pleasure. For stewardship, I think they had not been doing a lot. I think if we had a big donor, we would put if they donated something, we did a big native garden, so all our donors were on plaque there. And recently we had some pictures we framed, and that was a class gift, so we were going to put a plaque up for that. We do have a legacy society for requests, and I had asked the question when I got there was, what are we doing for these people? Because it's named after our founder. Hadn't done anything, so I asked them to start at least once a year near the founder's anniversary to have some kind of celebratory mass and luncheon to bring them in to thank them because and it started with a phone call. A woman called and said, "I'm leaving you with a will." I said, "Oh, great, you're a member of our Gaiac Legacy Society." She says, "What does that mean?" And I was like, "Oh, it doesn't really mean much." I mean, in the sense that, you know, what would the return be? So we're doing some stewardship, but it's just starting off. But my question was, I'm really interested in how to get younger people involved, because I would say we might have a few millennials, but probably we're mostly boomers and some of the silent generation, because we have a lot of schools and there are a lot of alumni ties, but those schools are gone now. So we don't have that connection to a younger generation. Should we just start looking for like-minded groups to bring them in to volunteer? What's a good strategy to get people who don't really have a connection to our congregation?
Yeah, that's a really great idea, in inviting other like-minded folks into your organization to volunteer and learn more, and have that as an opportunity to capture information, see who's interested, and then have a call to action after they come and volunteer, or whatever you end up doing with them. Whether it's consider donating, probably aren't ready for that after one visit.
Right.
But hey, here's, would you fill this document out? We'd love to keep you updated on what we're doing and the impact of today's visit, and bringing them in.
So we're running into an issue with this. So like-minded other organizations. So one is two of them are homeless shelters. So, and they're not going to give you they're people that give because they need to raise money for their own organization. So, like she's saying, we had all these Catholic schools that our sisters worked in that like are closed. None of the sisters, all the sisters are retired. So now we have sisters that run homeless shelters and do all this non-for-profit work, but they're not going to share their information with us. So we're having such a hard time acquiring new donors. The only way we acquire new donors right now is when a sister passes and someone sees the obit, and then they see it on social media or however they see it, and then they send a donation because they knew that sister, she was their teacher, or all that. That's like our only donor acquisition at this time.
Sure.
Like we're having such a hard time.
So 2 things there. One, and then Lisa, that you popped into here. When we're talking about working with like-minded organizations, it's certainly not asking like, hey, you know, who's really involved with your organization, we want to talk to them, but how can we partner together to advance this shared interest, whether that's doing an event or a volunteer opportunity together to increase impact, and then collecting information at that event so people can self-select, you know, do you want to hear more information? Or it's hosting specific open houses and having it advertised at these like-minded organizations and see who comes. It might not be, you know, 50 people, but even if a few folks come, that is noteworthy, especially as we think about, again, utilizing the younger generation that you do have at your organization and bringing them together as a collective force. Because then you can ask them, you know, who do you know? Who can you invite to Mass next weekend? And then we'll have donuts after and talk. These like little time-intensive, resource-intensive touches that will bring new people in. And we know from this presentation as well that Gen Z and Millennials like to be helpful in that way. So if you give them this task of, you know, bring someone to this event, you're not only increasing your donor pipeline, but you're also cultivating that existing donor by asking them for their help.
So, to start, the reason that I asked the question about stewardship is that older people used to be the people that we would take the coffee mugs to and all of the gifties to. And in my experience, that has, even in the older generations, has gone by the wayside. They don't like that. And as much as an older generation does not like that, the younger generation does not like that. That is not a good use of the money that they gave. And so just bearing that in mind, that really the better stewardship is the personal connection. And hey, this is what we did with that funding. You were actually able to cover X amount of meals or whatever. And then in reference to your question, one thing that is just an idea out there is to collaborate with the parishes through which that sister taught. Because everything is about a connection. And the people who had children or grandchildren who attended a school in that area is probably still connected in some way to that parish. And I think across all generations, something that is becoming more and more attractive to donors is collaboration. So the idea of you working with another organization is actually quite attractive to the younger generation, because that way they're not seeing a duplication, they're seeing people work together, which is the very essence of what's important to them.
That also makes me think of a who knows who exercise.
Yeah.
In terms of empowering, you know, your sisters, whatever religious staff that you're working with, and non-religious, of having a conversation of, you know, explaining why we're doing this intensified fundraising initiative, and we know that your connections are important, and we'd like your help in identifying folks that we can go out and speak with. So it's getting ahead of the obituary where, you know, Sister Lisa knows that, you know, she stays really close with these 30 students she previously had. It's asking for that up front, and that conversation should be about this culture of philanthropy.